Hello there, you scrub lords, and welcome to attempt number 2 at this video. I know that a lot of you saw that this video went up, and then a couple days later it got taken down. There was a couple of reasons for this. First of all, I want to apologize for the quality of that video. The problem with the video was that I was going off of information that had been repeated to me by another source. This source apparently, according to the information that's being provided by those of you in the comment section, which thank you for calling me out on it, appears to be wrong. However, I was not entirely wrong, having looked at a few other external sources other than Honeycutt. Personally, I don't really trust Honeycutt's book. I know that's going to sound like heresy, but I have to be very careful with the kinds of things that I repeat. Now, while Honeycutt's book is fantastic, and if you ever have the opportunity to buy Honeycutt's Firepower, buy it. Do take everything that he says in there with a grain of salt. While Honeycutt got his sources from the U.S. National Archives, there are several cases where archival documentation will sometimes contradict each other. And I'm finding a little bit of that with this MBT Kpz-70 shenanigans thing. This video was originally designed to explain why Gaijin went about nerfing the MBT-70 and the Kpz-70 reload speeds in terms of their reload times. They originally, as many of you already know, they had a 6-second reload, which equates to a 10 rounds per minute rate of fire. This was based off of the proposed rate of fire from the Rheinmetall Autoloader. However, much like the 120mm gun that was planned to be put on the Kpz-70 at a later date, the Rheinmetall Autoloader ran into quite a few issues in its development, and it turned out to be extremely expensive, extremely time-consuming, and as a result, I cannot seem to find anything but one reference that says the autoloader was ever fitted to the Kpz-70, the German autoloader. While this was going on, the US got a bit impatient waiting for the Germans to finish up this autoloader thing, and so they said, screw it, we're going to go and develop our own autoloader. And they developed what's known as the General Motors autoloading system for the MBT-70. They also fitted this autoloading mechanism to the MBT-70 prototypes and the Kpz-70 prototypes. So the first thing I really want to clear up is what I said early on in the video previously, and that was that I mentioned the MBT-70 had a 4-man crew. This is wrong, and this idea came from a previous vehicle before the MBT-70 known as the MBT-MR. Now, this vehicle was unique in the fact that it was an attempt by the US to remove the driver from the driver's compartment in the front of the hull. This allows you to lower the overall profile of the hull itself and thereby reduce the height of the tank. Now, the question is where to put the driver. At that point, the US decided that they were going to put the driver in a independently mounted seating position inside the turret. And what I mean by that is that the control linkages were specifically set up so that no matter which way the turret was rotating, the cupola and the driver's seat would stay facing forwards on the hull at all times. The Soviets had also experimented with this, I believe with the Object 416. However, in order to avoid this complex linkage system, the Soviets just gave it a limited turret traverse on the Object 416. But regardless, we're not talking about that. The MBT-70, however, carried this feature over, and it's one of the more defining features of the tank. Now, the other thing about this vehicle was that it had a 4-man crew, and this is where I got the initial myth of the MBT-70 having a 4-man crew, because I had thought that the MBT-MR turret design had originally carried over into the MBT-70 when it was redesigned with a 3-man crew in mind. So, that's my bad. And when they transitioned over and built the MBT-70, they built it with just a driver, a commander, and a gunner. By doing this, the idea was to reduce the amount of crew inside the tank and fit the vehicle with an autoloader of German design. So the Germans were originally tasked with building this autoloader. Now this leads me into my next issue with my last video, and that was I said that the Kpz-70 was fully incapable, as in not possible, of loading the Shillelagh anti-tank guided missiles. The autoloader, while it did have issues loading them with the plastic casings, and some sources say the propellant charges, some say the propellant or the plastic casings of the missiles themselves. Although I am more inclined to believe it was the propellant charges that were giving so much of an issue. The Germans could technically load the missiles with the autoloader. The thing is, they had to slow it way down in order for it to actually work properly. The other way to do it was to just store the missiles around the cabin in a 6 to 7 missile ready rack. And then they could load the missiles by hand, and that was found to be a much more reliable way of firing them. Now, the other issue with the autoloader, actually with the gun itself, was the plastic casings that were used to contain the ammunition. The ammunition wasn't contained in a drawn brass case like we would normally think. The conventional ammunition, both the flechettes, the canister, the APFSDS, and the heat round, all had this plastic sleeve casing around the propellant charge and the projectile itself, whatever the warhead may be. And this had a big issue, or the first one I should say, is that if it got wet, it would suck up all of the water and expand in diameter, meaning that you could not fit the round into the gun tube, which is a bit of a problem. If you can't even load your ammunition in the first place, how the hell are you going to fire it? If it was slightly drier, it produced horrible misses. And if it was even so slightly damp, the plastic casing, because it was supposed to be combustible when the round went off, there was supposed to be no casing left other than the base of the shell itself, which would be ejected out the rear of the gun breech. So this plastic casing, if it was a little bit wet, wouldn't combust all the way, and you would have bits of plastic that was unburned from the previous shots stuck in the gun tube and like lining the interior of it, which is a big problem, especially if you're trying to load another round after that. So yeah, there was a lot of issues with this, with the gun and the ammunition in and of itself. And then that's not even covering the issues with the autoloader. Now, the German autoloader was designed to feed both Shillelagh and conventional ammunition. Now, before we take off into another subject, I also want to quickly mention that the 152mm XM578 APFSDS rounds that were developed for it, like the long rod penetrators, were actually then later on modified, and they became the 105mm APFSDS round fitted with a new sabot. I imagine it was a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the simple version, which is kind of interesting. So, yes, the early APFSDS rounds that the 105mm gun shoots are, in fact, from the MBT-70. Interesting. Now, going back to the autoloader, I apologize for getting sidetracked here. However, the autoloader itself, there is some debate out there whether or not the autoloader was actually ever fitted, or the Rheinmetall autoloader was ever actually fitted to the Kpz-70. There is some documentation that says that where the U.S. Army inquired with the German government, or with the German Army, about whether or not they had actually fitted the Rheinmetall autoloader into a tank. And if you interpret some of the documentation provided, and I will put up this piece of documentation that one of the articles I'm referencing has here, it could be loosely interpreted as saying, yes, they may have fitted it in there and driven around with it. And I think that if they have put it in there, I don't think it's, this person also makes note of this as well, that it's too far out of the realm of possibility that they would have tried to actually load it with ammunition and test its functionality. However, there's no defining proof that says that the Rheinmetall autoloader was ever actually fitted to the tank. We know what the rate of fire is for hand loading, both the missiles and the conventional rounds, which was 2 rounds per minute, or 2 missiles per minute, and 4 rounds per minute loaded by hand, but we don't know for sure if the Rheinmetall autoloader was ever actually put into the tank. Again, there's just no definitive line that says, yes, this was put in, yes, we tested this, and it gave us this. It doesn't say that anywhere, or if it does, it's censored right now. We don't have access to it. Which makes my argument for the Kpz-70 having an autoloader capable of 10 rounds per minute a little hard to back up. And understandably, Gaijin has taken the safe route and has just created the version of the Kpz-70 with the American GM autoloader. Now, there is also, speaking of different guns and autoloaders and so on, there is also the misconception, which I talked about in the last video, of the Kpz-70 being equipped with a 120mm smoothbore gun. And while a great idea, never actually occurred. And I did say this in the last video, that it was never fitted. It was planned, but it was never fitted. And one of the games that this actually has happened in is Eugen's Wargaming. I believe it was an air-land battle, or no, European Escalation, air-land battle, and maybe Red Dragon. And in that game, they've got a vehicle called the Kyla, which in their game is a Kpz-70 fitted with a 120mm gun. That is actually not the Kyla. That is a mistake on the part of the developers. Now, the Kampfpanzer Kyla looks remarkably like a Leopard 1A6, and this is because the Leopard 1A6 was an attempt to copy the Kyla's turret design. So overall, I feel that I have covered and hopefully made up for. I hope I didn't get anything wrong in this video again. I'll go back and double check it just to be safe, but in any case, I think I've covered and corrected most of the misconceptions I put out in the last video, which is the direct opposite of what I was trying to achieve. And again, I would like to apologize for making that mistake, and I am going to do my very best to make sure that never happens again. In any case, if you guys have any further information that you feel that I missed or that I didn't cover that you feel is very important to this discussion, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. I have tried to cover all of the problems with my last video, however, I am sure I missed something in there. Without further ado, this has been Many Miles Away. Keep your tracks checked, keep your binos in place, keep around on the tube, and I will see you guys in the next video.